Hi, this is Bruce Lundvall. I'm the CEO and president of Jazz and Classics at EMI Records. We're responsible basically for three areas of music, all in the adult field, really. Blue Note is a legendary jazz label founded in 1939 and still active today. I would like to say it's probably the greatest jazz label in the world. We have Angel Records, which is our classical and Broadway label. Very old logo, actually. The logo of Angel, the Angel logo is actually older than the dog, as we say, older than the RCA dog, which is interesting enough, I guess. And then we have a pop adult label called Manhattan, which I started here in 1984, and it went away and it's come back again, full circle. And we also market all of the EMI classics from England and the Virgin classics from France. So we have a full plate of activity on our hands. We even do some world music on a label called Metro Blue, which is sort of a sub-label of Blue Note. For a lot of our international companies have a lot of Brazilian artists who are very interesting and wonderful, and we put them out on that label, and other international signings. We have an organization that's roughly 36, 37 people, including our art department. And the way we're structured is that we have essentially two general managers. Ian Ralphini runs Manhattan as the general manager of the Manhattan label. That is, again, our adult pop label. Tom Everett is our general manager of jazz and classical music. And under them, we share a structure of product managers. We have a fellow named Zach Hopkeppel, who's the head of marketing, and he assigns the product managers to various projects, and irrespective of genre of music in a way, except that there are two specialists that handle product management for classical music who are very much specialists. But other than that, we share our product managers between Angel crossover records like Sarah Brightman, all the Blue Note records, which now is not only just jazz, but people like Nora Jones and Al Green and Anita Baker and Amos Lee. Blue Note has expanded beyond the jazz area, but we are still essentially a pure jazz label. And the product managers get an opportunity to really expand their horizons by working on both pop and jazz and sometimes even a classical record. That's the way we've structured that, and it does seem to work very effectively. We have then a director of press with our own department, J.R. Rich, who's one of the best press people in the business, and she has a department of three people actually. Jem Korsman, who handles jazz as a specialist, is a very knowledgeable jazz publicist, and he's a musician himself. And then Maria Malta has been in the pop world and in the general contemporary rock and roll world, for that matter, and she works for JR. So it's a self-contained press department. We have a wonderful art department under Gordon G., our art director, and Burton Yount, who's one of our key designers. And they do all of the cover art for all of these areas of music. Now, when records come in from EMI Classics or Virgin Classics, the artwork is done in England and France for those, and we have to do some adaptations for the U.S. market. So there's a little work to be done on each of those. It's mainly barcoding and that sort of thing. Well, other than that, the original designs all are done pretty much in-house with outside designers at times, and then also with our internal staff. Kevin Carroll runs our promotion department. Essentially, he supervises a group of people called the Collective, which is a group of about 9 or 10 individuals who share their promotion activities for all of our little labels, as well as some other EMI-owned labels that are smaller, such as our Nashville operation with Keith Urban. They've crossed his last record over to pop radio, which was quite a monumental job. It's hard to do that. And he handles some of the other smaller labels, the Christian Music Group, when they have an artist that can get pop airplay, they handle that. And Kevin essentially directs the efforts of those people on the records that we have. We have a terrific finance director in Dave D'Urbano. He does all of our administration and finance for the division. And he has a staff of 2 or 3 people that have to help him with the books. We're always mindful of the bottom line, and the people we work for are always mindful of the bottom line. And we have Michelle Singer, who's our head of business affairs. She negotiates all the artist contracts, and she does a heck of a job. That's a tough one because you're up against some tough attorneys and some artists that want more than you're willing to give them very often. And then we have Jeff Zakum, who is in charge of new media, which is obviously the internet and all of the ways of selling music online. And that is a pretty good summation, I think, of the staff. Am I forgetting any departments? Production department, of course, we have A&R administration to make sure that the records come in on budget, and that all the bills are paid, obviously, for the sessions and for the guest artists or the sidemen on each record.
A&R.
And A&R, of course, is the most critical of all of the functions in any record company. And we have Eli Wolf, who started here about 7 years ago, and he has developed rapidly into one of the better A&R people in the business. And then, apart from Eli, there's Michael Koskuna, who's a consultant, and he has started Blue Note with me from the very beginning since 1984. But because he has his own label called Mosaic, it's a mail order company, he couldn't be hired as a full-time employee. So he's a consultant for us, but he does a lot of A&R work. He prepares all of our Blue Note reissues, and he also goes in the studio and produces acts for us. And then the other part of A&R is the signing process, and that is myself. I'm kind of more active as a signer than I am doing anything else that I do. And Tom Everett, he is also a signer in both the jazz and classical areas. And Ian Ralphini, who runs Manhattan, is a very good signer. Ian came from the UK originally. He ran Warner Brothers in England for a very long time. And he came to us directly from Atlantic Records in New York. So we're all kind of A&R in that sense, but we don't all produce records. Michael Koskuna is a signer too, but he is an actual producer. Eli Wolf is also a producer. Blue Note has pretty much from the beginning been involved in the whole online revolution, and we have our own website, of course. We have artist websites as well. We sell through Amazon and all the other ways that records are sold online. That's what Jeff Zakum's department is all about. So and this is a big part of our future, obviously. Now, it's maybe more a part of the future for pop music and younger music, but it also has had a real serious effect on some classical catalog sales, particularly opera recordings. People are buying online, and some jazz and jazz catalog as well. So that's all in the future, but it's now too, so big area of growth. My criteria for A&R is essentially musicianship, integrity, and originality in particular. So I really try not to make marketing signings. Sometimes you do that and it works, and very often you don't have a real artist. So whether it's obviously a jazz artist or a pop artist or a classical artist, we look first of all for artists who are original, who are new in many cases. Sometimes we go after an artist that's been around for a while and had a great career that hasn't recorded recently, like Al Green and Anita Baker, who are both on Blue Note. But in every case, we try to choose artists that are original, that have their own musical voice, whether they're an instrumentalist or a singer, and that's my standard. We can't sign hundreds of people here because we are a small group of people and a small group of labels. We're not in the mainstream pop business. We don't do hip hop. We don't do really rock and roll, but we do singer-songwriters and obviously every kind of jazz. And in the classical area, most of our classical roster does come from the UK on EMI Classics UK, and from France from Virgin Classics. But we have a small roster on Angel that embraces some very fine people, Christopher Parkening, the Eroica Trio, Ravi Shankar and his daughter Anushka Shankar, who has recently a new release. And then we have crossover people like Bernadette Peters and also Linda Eder, a wonderful Broadway singer, and most particularly Sarah Brightman, who sells millions of records. So we also do very selectively Broadway theater, Broadway musicals. And our big news, as we're making this video right now, is that we've just signed for the Broadway musical The Color Purple, which opens on December 1st in New York. And we're very excited about this. It could be a very, very big one. In terms of actually producing records and choosing the repertoire, in the jazz field, pretty much the artist decides what they're going to do in terms of repertoire and compositions that are used. We sometimes have suggestions, let's do an album of standards, let's do an album, a funky kind of album, or let's do a guest artist kind of thing. We did an album with John Scofield and Pat Metheny, and that's one example, but there are many examples of collaborations that come from our suggestions. That's pretty much it in the jazz area. In the classical area, Artists also have repertoire interests that, we have to either decide, yes, we'll do it, or maybe, no, it's too esoteric, And sometimes there are trade-offs. Deborah Voigt wanted to do an album of kind of art songs, of German art songs, Lieder, and that was fine, but we knew that wouldn't be a huge seller, so the trade-off was that we got her to agree to do like a Broadway album at some point, So it's all an interaction between the people in the company and the artists themselves, and trying to do the best kind of record you can, and one that'll have a commercial point of view, but also, more importantly, be an artistic statement, particularly in the jazz field and the classical field. Having said that, artists are free to choose producers, and we suggest them very often. Jazz producers are kind of few and far between. They're specialists, most of them. But Michael Kuskuna does a lot of that production. Sometimes the artists produce their own records, or there are outside producers that we use from time to time as well. But that's really kind of the artist's call in consultation with us. Classical area, there are very specialized people that do, they're all on the outside. We don't have any producers in-house, except in the UK we do. For EMI Classics, there are some people that are very, very good in-house producers. Producer's job is to get the best performance out of the artist, first and foremost. Also to help choose the repertoire and to get the best sounding recording with the engineer involved. So that's pretty much it. Some producers help to choose repertoire. I think with Norah Jones as an example, the repertoire was really already there when she made her first record. We did demos with her of about 25 songs. And then we heard her in live performance just doing a lot of different material, her own material and outside material, whether it was a country tune or a jazz piece, whatever. She can sort of sing the telephone directory and you get right down to it, So we talked with her about various songs. There was one piece that she played for me on a demo called Melancholia. And I heard it and I said, my God, it's beautiful. Who wrote this? Did you write this? She said, no, it's Duke Ellington. I said, and who wrote the lyric? And she said, well, I did. I said, you wrote a lyric to a Duke Ellington composition? She said, yeah. I said, well, it's brilliant. I said, but we'll have to clear it through the Ellington estate and all of that, and through the publishing company that had the original song. And so we couldn't put it on the first record. It would just take too long to clear it. But lo and behold, we did clear it for the second album, and it's now called I Don't Miss You at All. That's the essence of the lyric. But it's based on Melancholia, actually a piece that Ellington actually recorded for Capitol back in the 50s. When we make a record and we hire a producer, if it's an outside producer, there's a negotiation involved, as to what they'll be paid. Normally they will get royalty points and an advance. Depends on who the producer is as to what that's going to cost you. A major guy like, let's say, T-Bone Burnett, who's just produced Cassandra Wilson's next album, which will be coming out in January. It was a very expensive deal. He's had a tremendous track record of success, so it was not inexpensive to do that. And Anita Baker using Barry Eastman, that's a major pop producer, R&B producer. That was costly. Some of the jazz producers are less costly. But then again, the expectation of selling millions of records isn't there either. So, and of course, the greatest producer in the world, in my opinion, is Arif Mardin, and he was actually on our staff up until a year ago when he retired. But he produced both of Norah Jones's album, and of course was named Producer of the Year a couple of years ago at the Grammys for the second time in his career. So he, of course, being an employee, had a built-in arrangement in his contract for producing records. Well, artist deals really vary greatly depending on whether it's a new artist, where the deal ought to be I'm now talking in the jazz field principally. If you have a new jazz pianist, let's say Robert Glasper, who we have an album out by now, or Jason Moran, who was fairly recently signed with us about 5 years ago now, actually. The expectation of selling a lot of records isn't really there. So what you do is you make a deal that provides enough money for the recording, an advance for the artist that helps him to pay his bills, and you step up from album to album what you're going to pay based on sales platforms. So if an artist sells 100,000 records or something, then he's going to get a larger advance on the next record. In the pop area, New artists become very, very expensive because if they're pursued by other companies, obviously, you're in a competitive battle to try and sign them. But normally we do a P&L, we do a profit and loss projection on what we're going to sell a given signing in every case before we make a signing. And based on what we reasonably expect to sell, we make an offer. Now, sometimes back and forth, and other companies come in and say, no, well, I want that artist and I'm going to willing to pay more. Sometimes you lose the artist, sometimes you win. And that's part of having a good staff of people and having the artist know your people. Rarely do we make a signing in the abstract without the artist actually coming in, meeting with all the people in the building. In fact, Anita Baker had a sit-down meeting behind closed doors with every single one of my staff. Highly unusual, but it was a smart thing for her to do. She wanted to be sure that the people knew what they were doing, She hadn't made a record in about 9 years, so it was one of the reasons. And normally when you have the staff of the quality of ours, they can be pretty convincing with artists, and therefore you can make a deal that might be more in line with what you really can spend, I've not ever, since I've been in this position, which is now 17 years, I must say, I don't think I've ever gone and made a crazy deal. I've done that in the past, Oh, we got to get the artist, so therefore you can pay millions of dollars. Well, we don't pay millions of dollars. First of all, it's not that kind of roster, So you can't have everybody. Some of these artists price themselves out of the market, well, as far as what I do. But we have pretty good P&L results with most of our artists. I mean, there are some few artists that lose money for us, but they're so important artistically that I'm not going to let them go. So I stay with them with the hopes of developing a catalog. This is particularly true with jazz and classical artists. So without naming names, if you have an artist that you really believe is important in terms of the evolution of the music and where it's going, you want that artist on the label. And if they lose a little money, it's just a little money. If the label itself is generating a profit, you can afford to have a few people that you're building, essentially a catalog for the future, an annuity that will be selling 20, 30 years from now, if you're right about the artist you sign, We have a budget for A&R every year, and we're on a fiscal calendar that starts April 1 through March 30th of the following year. And when we do our budget, we do a lot of pre-planning to say these are the things we expect to do. These are the artists on the label that we're going to make new records, and then you have to allow for new signings on all three of our labels, Angel, Blue Note, Manhattan. So you put in a budget in the anticipation of signing certain people. Now you never know who you're going to end up signing. It's sort of it's a plan, but it's a broad-based plan because things change all the time. I mean, I had no idea that we were going to get The Color Purple as an example. There were 3 other labels that really wanted it. And in the door came my friend Scott Sanders, who was a producer of the show, Quincy Jones and Oprah Winfrey, the other 2 producers. So that also helps a great deal with this one. And we had a meeting with all of my staff, and they convinced Scott that we might be the best place to go. And what I said to him, and this happens to be a fact, I said, I can give you something that Sony and Universal and Disney really can't give you. He said, what's that? I said, I can give you a #1 prioritization. What? I said, yeah, you're that important to us that you'll be our #1 priority album when it ships in January. And so I think that counted for quite a bit. In other words, there weren't 30 other things that we're all going to be working as happens often in pop labels. So we got pretty lucky with this one. If it's a hit, I think it's going to be. The marketing process is really a long-term situation because we use a phrase called setup, meaning that you need to have the time from the time the record is finished until you until you release it to pre-plan the marketing, get everyone aware of what the record sounds like, what the cover looks like, what the marketing plan is, long before the record actually ships out the door. It used to be, when I was at Columbia Records a long time ago, when you heard a record that you thought was really sensational, you'd want it out the door the next day. But now, you've got to get it to the press. And remember, magazines have long lead times. You don't suddenly go onto the cover of, People magazine by sending the record and expecting it to be on the cover next week or anything like that. You need a long setup time for press in particular, for international purposes, for your own field distribution company, the salesmen, the promotion people out there. you want to make sure they hear the record long before it comes out. You want to make sure that they know what the marketing plan is. And so it all begins with a plan, a written plan and advanced music. It would be so nice to say that, oh, well, Sarah Brightman has a new album coming out in January. We'll just ship it in January. No, we're not going to ship it until March, and that's going to be tight. You know, because even though she's familiar to everyone in the company, has sold millions of records here, you want to be sure that the plan is in place, that the music is heard by everybody, that everyone sees the cover, knows what the touring plan is, and all those aspects are part of it. And then, you know, each record gets its own particular plan. In jazz, straight ahead jazz, there are basically 3 or 4 magazines that you advertise in, Downbeat, you know, Jazz Times and Jazz Is, and a few others. Sometimes you go into New Yorker magazine with a smaller, that's very costly, but with a smaller space ad. There may be, there's no commercial radio for jazz, so that's a promotional job. Sometimes with a pop artist now, you use television advertising, which is pretty expensive. And you have to think about doing a video. You don't do video on jazz artists per se, but certainly on a Norah Jones or a vocalist, you'll do a video. There's something else called an EPK, which is an electronic press kit, which is essentially a low-cost video that you send out to the press and to radio and so on to showcase what the artist is all about and what the new album is all about. And these are a very effective tool to use, particularly internationally. We've just signed whoever it might be, Robert Glasper. Well, what does he look like? You know, well, here's an EPK where he's playing and talking about his music, so everyone will get a sense of who he is and what his, you know, what his direction is and what his vision is as an artist. So that's another aspect. In, of course, the mainstream pop labels, you're talking about videos that could cost up to $1 million. We don't have those kinds of budgets, but when you had Norah Jones, the good news was that she didn't like videos. She didn't care about it, MTV and VH1. So her first video cost $30,000, and they weren't going to play it at all until the record became so big that, you know, this was this was Come Away With Me. And so she said, I really want to do a video. So she's walking on a beach in LA somewhere singing Come Away With Me with a carnival in the background, but it was not a produced video as such. But after a while, she became so big that VH1 actually had to play it. Next time around, she did a much more produced video. We can't spend what the pop labels spend. You know, some of these videos become like miniature, you know, movies. You know, and they're very, very expensive. And you know, if the record's not a hit, you've just wasted all your money. So we try to control that expenditure within reason. But you know, for classical records, again, see, that's different. You go into the classical magazines, you go into the New York Times, obviously, and places like that. You try and follow an artist's tour, and you have tour advertising. We do a lot of co-op advertising, which essentially is with the retailer. You know, nothing is free at retail anymore. You can't put an album in the front of the store and say, I want this up front in your store when you walk in the door. You pay for that space, you know. So that's all part of the marketing effort. So there's the national effort, and then there's the local co-op advertising effort. And that's all part of the cost and the plan of launching a record. Norah Jones came to me in a most unusual way, and when people ask how I signed her, I always say, it's because I returned a phone call. And what are you talking about? And I said, well, you know, a lot of people in our business aren't too eager to return all their phone calls. I learned a long time ago that you return every call within the week's time, you know. So I'd gotten a call from an accountant in our royalty department uptown, and I said, oh, well, I wonder if we have a royalty problem. So I said, hi, and she said, this is Shell White, woman. I didn't know her, never met her before. She worked for EMI, but in royalties, which is a whole, you know, floor full of people that do the accounting work. And I said, do we have a royalty problem? She said, no, I have this young jazz artist I want you to hear. I said, well, send something to me. You know, she said, no, I have to bring it to your office. You have to meet her. I said, okay, great. Let's do this on Friday. Maybe this was a Monday when I got the call. I said, let's do it on Friday when the phones are, you know, not ringing off the hook, and we'll do it toward the end of the day, around 5 o'clock. And now I expect yet another Diana Krall sound-alike, look-alike, because when Diana Krall hit, all of a sudden I was getting demos from buxom blonde singers who played the piano, you know, with their breasts hanging out, you know, most of the time, and they weren't very good. I said, here comes another one. And lo and behold, the door opens on Friday, and in comes Shell White, who I hadn't met before, with this very pretty but very shy, dark-haired girl with glasses and jeans on, and she wasn't, she was very, very shy. She didn't say very much, and I said, well, you know, what do you do? She said, well, I sing. I said, well, I heard that. And I went to North Texas State. I was a jazz, piano, and voice major. And I'm living in New York now. And I'm doing gigs downtown with some jazz groups and some pop groups as well, you know, new people. And, you know, I'm just struggling. I'm working as a waitress. I said, great. Well, do you have something to play? And she said, well, I have a demo of 3 songs. And I said, well, let me hear it, please. So we put the demo on. And the first song was a song that was one of my personal favorites, called Spring Can Really Hang You Up the Most. Tommy Wolfe, Fran Landesman song from a 50s musical called The Nervous Set, about the bohemian life in the 50s. It was not a big hit on Broadway, but the song was beautiful, great, great standard, and one that kind of has difficult changes, you know, and not easy to sing, for sure, or to play for that matter. A lot of jazz artists would play it instrumentally, but not a whole lot of singers would tackle the song. And I put it on, and I stopped the equipment after I heard it. I said, wait a minute. I said, how do you know this song? I said, oh, I've always loved this song. I said, but it's the best version of it I've ever heard. She said, what? I said, I think it's brilliant. You just nailed this song. I said, and who's your piano player? She's good. He's good. I said, no, she said, that's me. I said, what? I said, I'll tell you right now, before we get to the next, I don't know if I really remember this correctly, but the other 2 songs were Walking My Baby Back Home and a pop song, and they were all terrific. I said, you're on Blue Note. She said, what? I said, I want to sign you to Blue Note, period. Get an attorney, and we're going to make a deal. I've not heard anyone with this kind of a voice that you sound like she was singing to you directly, you know. Very intimate, wonderful, wonderful quality, great intonation. Their piano playing matched her voice perfectly. You know, I kept thinking, like, she's sort of like a new kind of version of what Nat King Cole was in the beginning, a guy that could play the piano so brilliantly and sing with, you know, in a style that was completely like no one else, you know. And that's what I heard. And we signed her. But first of all, we did a bunch of demos, because I said, by the time you get, you know, your deal done, why don't we start now? Let's do some demos. So she went in the studio, I think it was in 1 or 2 nights, and recorded something like 20 songs or 22 songs. And they ranged from her own songs to a Mose Allison song, a Duke Ellington piece, a Ray Charles, Hallelujah, I Just Love Her So, and so on. They were all over the place. And I said, but they're all good. I said, I can't believe this. So I said to myself, well, this girl can sing anything, you know. And so we planned the album from that point on. I said, you're obviously very eclectic. And well, that was the start of the whole thing. And most of those songs, actually, many of those songs were on the first record. I thought she would sell records. And I'll tell you what, I didn't think she was going to sell millions of records by any means, you know. So, well, she'll sell 100,000 records, if not more. But I had real expectations for her, doing just what she did in her way. And the thing that happened that was wonderful was that we had, before she ever went in the studio, we had a convention in Rome, worldwide managing directors meeting, where everyone had to present the new releases that were going to come out in the fall and through Christmas. And I had to present Angel and Blue Note records, you know. And I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to play one Norah Jones demo. There's one song called Turn Me On, a John Loudermilk song. I said, I'm going to play it. And I was advised that, no, you can't do that. The record's not even going to be recorded yet. I said, no, I got to do this. So I did. I said, we don't have any video, we don't have any slides. There's one slide at the end of this presentation. I just want you to hear this one song. I think we found somebody that's very special. And I want you to hear this. And there's the whole company sitting out there. And I played this thing that was a standing ovation at the end. Everyone got it. Everyone got it, you know. And they loved the fact that she was beautiful. There's that one slide, which happens to be the album cover of the first record, at the very end of the piece. So that was it. She was set up all over the world, you know, as a priority artist. And everyone kept saying, send me demos. Who's that girl? Norah what? Norah Jones, is it? Send me more demos. So maybe a year later, the album came out. And so she was set up like in an unbelievably effective way, just from that one moment in Rome, you know. I was lucky. First and foremost, if someone wants a job in the music industry, it's a very hard industry to get in the door. So my advice for any young person is to take any job that's available. I don't care if it's a retail record clerk or whether it's as a trainee or an intern. You know, some of the interns end up working for us as full-time employees. That's one way in the door. We don't have a lot of turnover in our division. So, you know, it's harder for a young person to get in. Now, to be musically aware is the most important thing. To be someone that really is, not necessarily a musician, but someone that's a huge fan. And be a musician that's even better, you know. But it's not necessary. But, you know, it's just hard to get into any record company at the ground floor level. So that's why I again repeat that the most important thing is to take whatever job's available, even if it's not a lot of money. Once you're in the door, then you can show your stuff and grow with the company. And that's what's happened in most cases with people. I don't look for people that have been at music courses. A lot of them have, and it's a big plus for sure. They come in with a lot of information that you would have to learn on the job otherwise. But it's not a criterion. Yeah, and particularly to never give up their passion for the music and to really just live the music. I think that's the most important thing. And of course, if you're an accountant or an attorney or something, I'm not talking about those jobs. I'm talking about the product management jobs, the A&R jobs, the press jobs, and so on. It's a very people-oriented business, as you know. What we're selling is thin air, and we're dealing with people all the time, whether it's the artist, the manager of the artist, the attorney, the booking agent, you know, all of it is people, and internally your own people. You have to have people skills, of course. You know, half the battle is dealing, well, for one thing, if you're dealing with some serious artists, you better know something about the music, because they'll catch you in a lie in a second, you know. All the musicians know the ones that are serious about it and the ones that are kind of a little bit fraudulent or playing a game. So people skills are most important, I think, in those kinds of jobs for sure. I'm very optimistic about the future of the music business because of the musicians. That's what makes it happen. You know, it's not us, we're middlemen, you know. It's the artists that make it grow, the new artists that come in the door that you haven't heard before all of a sudden excite you. The artists actually create the business. They always have. People forget that. We are not as important as the artists. Some people in the music business think they're more important than the artists. Not the case. Not ever the case. Just realize what your role is, you know. To be a great middleman is a pretty good and important thing to be.